We might not have control over when a game comes out, but we do control when we play it. And the worst day to play a game is launch day. Bugs, poor balance, the odd design choices that made it past beta testing, they're all still there. But the real tragedy is that first impression, the one that will stick with you even if the game is fixed. So often, the best of gaming happens a year after the hype, the ups, the downs. Sometimes, a game is worth the wait. So is Starfield one of those games? Well, let's have a look.
Navigational feedback checks out.
This was my first playthrough of Starfield, and I did a pretty good job insulating myself from the news. I didn't watch any Let's Plays, I skipped any news snippets where I saw Starfield footage. 3 things made it through my net. First, most of you didn't like it. Second, bullet sponge enemies. And third, there's a new game plus that mixes things up in interesting ways. So armed with these 3 things, I bought it on sale, fired it up, and immediately closed it. Because in order to install mods properly, you have to fire it up once. Yet this review will have mods, because one of the benefits of a 1 year later review is that I don't have to review the base copy. The year produced a number of mods that have the potential to vastly improve what was otherwise a very poorly received game. I'm reviewing the experience, because that's what we're actually playing. So first task, we gotta deal with those bullet sponge enemies. 2 minutes of research informed me that in the base game, 20 hit points is added to every enemy, every level. This is dumb. I installed a mod that brings that down to 5. You can also get variants in 10 and 3, some that make it flat out 0. The forums seem to like the 5, so that's what I went with. But unless you want to make the game incredibly easy, you'll want the companion mod that does the same thing to you. Next, I cranked the difficulty up to very hard, because that's usually what I play Bethesda games at. And, well, even with the mod, it still took 8 clips per enemy. A few levels in, I had it tweaked to very hard enemy damage, but normal for myself. I thought survival mode was the best way to play Fallout 4, and this felt a lot like it. With that substantial tweaking, the gameplay was solid. As the levels progressed, the hit point balance fell farther and farther away from the intended experience, and it just got better. Hard enemies went down pretty quickly, but they'd take me down in a blink if I messed around. Cover is mandatory. Headshots matter. Notice there's no health bars or damage numbers? Well, that's because if I wanted to play Borderlands, I'd play Borderlands. So they're gone. For combat to feel visceral, it has to be quick and dangerous. And that's what I've done. This is good stuff. And all it took was changing everything. You might have noticed something else that's gone. The color filters. They looked terrible in every other Bethesda game, so I didn't even bother looking at the game before modding them out. I came across a couple other popular mods that sounded like clear quality of life options, but I skipped the menu revamp and one that hides the HUD outside of combat. Those actually both looked pretty solid, but it also looked like they might conflict with other mods, and I'd rather not try to troubleshoot a game until I know at least at some level what it's supposed to be doing. I'll tell you, my time in Starfield with the mods I did pick has been squeaky clean in terms of bugs or crashing. Not sure what the base game was like, but the only bugs I've come across this entire time have been the odd flickering texture. Well, and this sometimes happens. And it's happened several times in my playthrough, so I'm guessing they did come across this and just decided to leave it in, and I'm happy they did. But despite this game actually looks pretty darn good. I heard a lot of rumblings about the graphics before I played, but I'd have to guess that most of that was because of the filters, because this looks fine. Yeah, there's better out there, but this isn't trash. This is perfectly nice to look at. Let's stick with the good for one last huge thing, the shipbuilding. I've spent a dozen hours just mucking around with my ships. That sort of thing should drive me nuts, but let me say, it doesn't get old. If you're willing to put in the effort, you will not regret the results. My latest is an attempt to channel some EVE Online asymmetry, and I really like this little demon right here. The actual ship combat is a little shallow, leaning much more into an arcade feel, but I don't think I'd change a thing. Having a pirate talk smack to you 1 second, only for you to EMP his ship into the Stone Age and proceed to board and steal his stuff, is a hell of a power trip. So the game's great, then, right? Well, there are some issues. First off, loot. The whole system is faff. It adds absolutely nothing to the game, and you'll find yourself spending way too much time unloading junk. The outposts in this game only serve the purpose of storing that loot. Sure, you can use them to manufacture things, but by the time you're in a position to consider that, you're already swimming in too much stuff anyway. This is home in my game. It's a warehouse, and coming here to sort out my loot is the chore that's plagued my entire game. Do yourself a favor, don't wait to come up with a system for your loot. Get your warehouse built and set up the bins for your items. Don't pick up stuff unless you need it, and if it's still early enough in the game that you're not sure what you need aluminum, titanium, iron, and adaptive structures. Leave the plutonium and the gold behind. By the time you need it, you can afford to just buy it. This stuff worked in Fallout 4 because rebuilding society was the whole game. Here, it's just tedium. So next we have pacing. Recall in Skyrim, missions didn't give you XP, only combat gave you XP. Now technically in Starfield you get a little bit of XP for missions in the same way that like cabbage is food. Realistically, you're only going to get your experience from combat or surveying. And since I've already talked about combat, I'll talk about surveying for exactly how much time I spent in the game doing surveying.
But that ability, power, it's just plain scientifically impossible.
So you'll get your experience from combat, and I found that it had the unfortunate side effect of influencing how I proceed in missions. I could talk my way through a political situation, or I could kill every last person in the building. Well, one of those is going to get me level 51, and Eiley wants another point in particle beams. A mission done peacefully is a mission done without reward. The vast majority of your leveling will happen because you decided to grind it. But you don't want to go guns blazing into every mission because that would screw up your reputation with everyone. Right? So let's talk about agency, because Bethesda sure didn't. Starfield has a plot like Skyrim had a plot. It's much more reasonable to describe Skyrim or Starfield as a bunch of unconnected stories that are set in the same world. In one story, you might totally screw over the leader of the blah blah blah, and in the next he greets you cordially. If you hit a moral choice, it's always skin deep. Don't worry, there won't be lasting repercussions. And sometimes there'll be perfectly reasonable solutions to problems that just aren't an option, even if you poke around for them. In one mission, you're tasked with bringing in someone who's accused of a thing, I'll leave this spoiler free, and they refuse because they're worried they'll be killed while in custody. Unfortunately, you can't verify their innocence. So you can either trust that they didn't do it, or you can kill them, because they figure they're better off taking their chances fighting you. This is an interesting problem, and it suffers for two reasons. One, you're not really given any inclination to lean either way. And second, and perhaps way more importantly, you have a giant freaking battleship over there with a loyal crew and can take them into your custody while you sort it out. You'd think the I have a battleship card would be something you could play, all the time. Submit to customs, I have a battleship. Hand over an artifact, I have a battleship. $2.50 for milk, I have a battleship. But no, these aren't really stories that you interact with. They're stories that you're told. And I suppose that's not the end of the world. There's a lot of them, and they're pretty diverse. But there's a part of me that thinks they should have set up things more like LA Noire, where the stories are actually in little chapters. Keep things tighter, more focused. They wouldn't have to be in any particular order, but if that's what we're doing, why not embrace it? Well, there's kind of an answer to that, and I don't think it's where you were expecting me to go with it. You see, the main story in Starfield is rubbish. I get that you're supposed to withhold the meat of the plot until the thick of it, but Starfield just drops some floaty metal things in front of you and says, you're interested in this. Sound familiar?
It's me. I am Sean. I am your son.
But by the time you see them, you've already flown a spaceship between stars like you were getting a snack from a corner store. It's not clear why these people even care about these artifacts. I'd actually recommend ignoring the main quest for at least 20 levels, because this is where the boring tutorial missions that people talk about live. If you do it later, you'll steam through those tutorial missions in 10 minutes. And yet, there's nothing in this game that needs a tutorial. If you're playing this fresh now, heed my advice, just drop off the robot and the artifact, tell them you'll do their thing, take their spaceship, and do whatever you want until you actually feel like getting back on the tracks. And for a lot of people, a hollow story would be the end of the rope for Starfield. But it wasn't for me. Because while I need a good story to enjoy a game, I don't need the game to provide it. Let me qualify this. Did you know EA claims that 85 million people play The Sims 4, a game with basically no story? I have no way of independently verifying this, but let's say a tenth of those people actually got really into it. Does that mean that 8.5 million people were just there for the flashing lights and the pretty colors? Well, no. The Sims games are dollhouses, and dollhouses don't come with stories. They're for writing your own stories. My favorite game, RimWorld, is built as a story generator. The plots that are there can be completely ignored, and the game is still immensely compelling. When I play Fallout 4, I'm not some parent looking for their kid. I'm some adventurer bringing the Commonwealth together. There's enough setting here for me to come up with my own content. Not that I mind some compelling stories to add to it. I adore New Vegas as much as the rest of you. But there's a reason I play all these games without fast travel. It's because I'm role-playing the hell out of the thing. Heck, I played Ghost Recon Wildlands without fast travel. No one does something like that without a compelling story to justify it, and it sure as hell didn't come from the game. So if you're hoping for a deep, involved, interactive plot, hey, I'm not trying to tell you you're wrong. We all want different things from games, and I totally understand why you didn't like Starfield, because it isn't that.
Well, you, a little lost for words.
It's a bunch of little stories to set the backdrop to your adventure. It's Skyrim in space.
Bruce?
And I'm so happy I waited a year to play it. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.